Okay, so to be successful, a man must exert an effective influence upon his brothers and upon his associates. And the degree in which he accomplishes this depends on the personality of the man, the incandescence of which he is capable, the flame of fire that burns inside of him, the magnetism which draws the heart of other men to him. I give you Mr. Steve Schumer.
Wow. Wow. Janelle, and you didn't even say anything about the Packers in that. Was that a Vince Lombardi quote?
It was.
I appreciate that. Look, it's a pleasure to do this. Let's see, can I, let's see, Mike, I'm trying to share my screen. Am I allowed to?
Yep, go ahead.
There we go. Now it says host is disabled, participant screen sharing.
Hold on.
I just want to share a deck and then we'll get going.
Okay, hang on a second.
That's all right. Anyway, as Mike's doing that, I just want to, first of all, I appreciate the opportunity, Janelle, to be back doing this. You know, just a quick origin for this deck that I'm going to take you through in these lessons. I started coming to these meetings about 4 years ago. I might be off a little bit, but I remember after listening to all of these wonderful guest speakers on a monthly basis that Janelle and Gary had arranged, I felt an urge to help. I was participating in these meetings, but I wasn't helping anybody. And I felt after almost a year that I owed that to the group. And so I said to Gary, I remember, who is my old IBM buddy, and I said, you know, I'd like to be a guest speaker. And he said, Steve, that would be wonderful. We'd love to have you. And he said, what are you going to talk about? I said, I don't know. I don't know yet. But what I'm going to do is, if you give me the opportunity, I'm going to step back after having been, this was 3 years ago, at that point, 38 years with IBM. And I said, I'm going to give very serious thought to what the heck have I learned in almost 40 years that I think might be able to help folks, other professionals like myself, who are in transition, who are looking for jobs, trying to fill their jobs. I'm sorry? I think that. So in doing that, so that's how I came up with this. Thank you, Mike. I see I can now share my screen, and I assume you guys can all see it. I just need one person to say yes.
Yes.
Thank you. So
yes,
that's how I came up with this deck. I sat back and I did come up with what I called this very simply 4 lessons from almost at that point 40 years with IBM, specifically prepared for this group. So look, I'll thank you in advance for the hour that we're going to spend approximately with me sharing this with you. I hope that all of you get value out of this. That's my only objective. I'm not here to preach. I'm here to share with you things that I've learned along the way that I hope will resonate with you. Maybe one lesson, maybe 3, maybe all 4. And so we'll get right into it. And if you do have any questions, feel free to just come off mute and ask me. But we have a lot to cover. And as I said, I'm going to go fast, but interrupt me if you'd like to. So before we get into the 4 lessons, just a little bit of context. Yes, I've been with IBM now 41 years, 38 when I first prepared this. By the way, I haven't changed the presentation in any way in the last 3 years. And all I really want you to get out of this slide in terms of context is I've spent a lot of time in sales with IBM, spent the first half of my career basically in sales. In fact, in 1987 to 1991, Gary and I were partners servicing that financial services large account. Great time for both of us, I know. And the other thing I would tell you was I've had a lot of different experiences, and you can see my color coding of marketing, sales, but mostly sales, selling directly to customers. I'm a sales guy by background. And when I wasn't selling directly to customers, I've done things that in IBM we call sales enablement, sales transformation, sales operations. But I've been around sales my entire career. The only other thing that I'd like you to know about me is I think I have a sense of humor. And while I won't take the time to go through this because we are limited in time, I will share quickly with you that in addition to that IBM background, there are 10 things that I typically share with people who I've not met before, or teams that I inherit with an IBM to kind of break the ice. And so one of these 10 items is false, the other 9 are absolutely true. And as you glance at them, and you'll all get a copy of the deck, but I'll just highlight a couple. It is true, by the way, the third one down, I did dance on a desk at IBM headquarters in White Plains, New York one morning, and I did sing at the top of my lungs, "I'm just a sweet transvestite from the Rocky Horror Picture Show." We don't have time, otherwise I'd sing a few bars. The one underneath it is also true. I did have a picture of me in tights and white underpants shown to, at the time, IBM CEO Lou Gerstner. And the one to the right of that, it's absolutely true, not that I'm proud of it, that I had a customer complaint letter addressed to IBM CEO John Akers back in the mid-'80s about me, citing an alcohol-induced vomit trail that I left all across the hotel parking lot at an IBM customer conference. So what usually is concerning to folks is when they actually read all these and they realize that 9 of the 10 are true, it's a little bit disconcerting, but hopefully also to let you know with a sense of humor that we need to be able to laugh at ourselves, which I do. I will tell you, by the way, the one that's false is the second one. I did not have a manager on my IBM team who was one of 22 children. She was one of 23 children. Her name was Helen Gerlach, and as Gary knows, she was one of 23 children born in a span of 27 years to the same parents with no multiple births. And at the time, they were only the 3rd largest family in Minnesota. Otherwise, everything else on the slide is true. And yes, as Janelle likes to tell you, oh, by the way, yes, that was the picture of me shown to Lou Gerstner. I was younger. I did paint my hair, and I was at least 20 pounds lighter. And I had more hair. And as Janelle, as I started to say, likes to say, we are both diehard Packer fans. I don't think she has, though, that gold jacket that I have or Packer tie. But other than that, we share a very similar passion. So enough about me. Let's talk about what I'd like to talk to you about tonight. These are the 4 lessons that I came up with. And the comments I'd make up front before we dive into any one of them is this. When you read them, right, pursue something you're passionate about. Sounds like a good thing to do. Just like Gary said, the analogy of everybody would like to be a good listener. Everybody would like to pursue something you're passionate about. It's not that easy, is what I'm going to suggest, but I think it's important. Differentiating yourself by your questions and points made may seem like common sense, but there's more to it than that. And I'll share with you why I think that. Don't take no for an answer, which I know Janelle put in the note might be the most fun part of this, and it might be also the most serious one in terms of helping you land your next job. And then personalizing your networking, again, will sound like common sense, but maybe my story around it and what I'm going to share with you around these are sort of little vignettes throughout my career. By the way, the first 2 happen to be from very early in my career. The last 2 happen to both be from about 10 years ago, after I was with IBM about 30 years. So with that, I'll give you some context for pursuing something you're passionate about. So let me just talk about John Shingleton for 2 minutes. John Shingleton was a great influence on me. John was the head of the career placement services at Michigan State University, had 50,000 people at the time on that campus. And I was fortunate enough to have a one-on-one with John while I was at Michigan State. And in that short time that I spent with him, I walked out with these key notes, and I took them to heart. He said, Steve, because I asked him for suggestions. I said, John, I want to get a good job when I graduate. And I know you've written these books. You're actually very famous, both within Michigan State, outside Michigan State. And what would be your key suggestions to me? And he said, Steve, be the master of your own destiny. And I said, I don't know what that means. And he basically said, if you don't know where you're going, others will determine it for you. So he simply was suggesting to do these things, invest the time to come up with a plan, to figure out what you want to do. Start early, made sense, but he was saying, don't wait until you're 2 months before you're graduating, start a year before you're going to graduate. Research the industry and the company extensively. Differentiate yourself by your questions and points made, and look for something that you're passionate about and that you'll enjoy. So what I said to you a few minutes ago, the first 2 lessons I learned were from John Shingleton, who I was quite inspired about and from. And so I did research industries and companies, and in doing so, I came up with questions that I wanted to ask that I hope would differentiate me. And I took to heart what he said about pursuing something you're passionate about. So how did that realize itself? Well, before I graduated from Michigan State, I had the opportunity to interview with General Foods, who, for those of you that are old enough and may remember General Foods, at the time that I was graduating from Michigan State, General Foods, General Mills, and Procter & Gamble were the three most highly rated consumer products companies in the United States. And I was fortunate to be interviewed by General Foods. Now, what I'll tell you going into this, remember, this lesson is about pursuing something you're passionate about. I was passionate about marketing. I was passionate about the opportunity to be a brand manager or marketing manager within a consumer products company like General Foods. General Foods, in fact, only interviewed at 12 MBA schools in the country. It was a very, very coveted role. And anybody that I knew that was getting an MBA in marketing anywhere in the country was significantly interested to get an offer from any one of those three companies I mentioned. And I had the opportunity to interview with General Foods. And I will tell you that, and you'll ask me, Steve, why do you have this? But this was my agenda back in February of 1980 when General Foods flew me in from East Lansing, Michigan to White Plains, New York, their corporate headquarters. And there were 9 interviews within a span of one day for them to check me out, for me to check them out. So the point is, I go into these interviews with General Foods desperately looking for an offer, very excited about it. But before I got there, I will tell you that per John Shingleton's encouragement, I read a number of articles about the food industry and consumer products industry. Then I read a number of more articles about General Foods. I was very well prepared for my interviews. And as I was reading some of those articles, I remember one that struck me. It happened to be about the future of the food industry. And it talked about how sometime in the coming decades, we'd be mining food from the bottom of the sea. And it went on to talk about how that because of the need to feed and so forth, the world. And I remember as I read that, there was just something that struck me. And I said, that's interesting, but I don't find myself drawn to that topic. There was something actually as sort of off-putting about it, but I just stuck that in the back of my mind. I wanted a job and I was excited about the interview with General Foods. So I'll tell you that I'll highlight 3 of these interviews very quickly. I don't remember Mr. Mauney's first name, but I met Mr. Mauney in product management. And he was, I remember, a Harvard graduate, had a very good job. He was product manager at General Foods. He was actually the product manager for Kool-Aid. Kool-Aid was one of their products. And I remember sitting in his posh office and he had the big Kool-Aid guy in the back of his office, a big stuffed Kool-Aid guy. And on his board was tracking market share. And as he talked, and to Gary's point, I really was listening to what he said. But I remember thinking to myself, for as impressed as I was with him and for what he was talking about, there was another part of me that said, so you're investing your time in a product that at the end of the day basically is sugar and rots kids' teeth. Now, that's just one perspective, but I remember that stuck in my mind. Then I had lunch with Ed Queso. He was the vice president of marketing for all of General Foods. And during that lunch, I remember him saying to me, Steve, you know what makes me passionate about working for General Foods? I said, no, Ed, please share that. And he said, the fact that everybody has to eat and we influence the fact that they will eat our products. And I remember it struck me that that wasn't something that jazzed me. That's all. Still interested in the company, still interested in the job, but that didn't come across to me the same way it did to Ed. And the key was the last conversation with Mr. Fisher. Mr. Fisher was the head of research at General Foods. And he sits down with me and he says, Steve, let me give you an example of how we would work together if you were hired by General Foods and you were a product manager. And let me give an example from just this past year where our Jell-O sales, specifically our cherry Jell-O sales, because General Foods was the manufacturer for Jell-O, the major brand, And he said our cherry Jello sales were significantly down. And before you laugh, realize this was a significant part of General Foods business. And he says, so our cherry Jello sales were down. And so we didn't know why. And so we did some research on it. We got with the product manager and we pulled some focus groups together. And what we learned from those focus groups is there was nothing wrong with our pricing. There was nothing wrong with our promotions, our advertising, our logistics, the product itself. What it was the color of the cherry that they were using, which of course was artificial. He said it wasn't subliminally what people viewed as cherry red. So almost subliminally, it was turning them off a little bit. The taste was fine, the pricing was fine, but it was hurting our sales. And so we brought in another numbers of focus groups, and we started testing different colors of cherry to see which ones would be most appealing to those focus groups. And at that moment, and I don't know if you've all experienced this, I assume you have, but like in any interview, there's a part of me that my left brain, for example, is controlling in terms of what Mr. Fisher was seeing on the outside, what he was hearing and seeing. And what do you think he was hearing and seeing? I was leaning forward, I was showing intense interest, and I said to him, Mr. Fisher, that's fascinating. So you tried the different colored cherries, and what came of that? And please tell me more. The other part of my brain was controlling what he couldn't see in here, which was inside. And I remember saying to myself, oh, are you kidding me? This is what I would do as a product manager, is be working with you to test the different colored cherry reds. Now, this is all about to each his own. But I left General Foods that day, took the flight back. And you already know, by the way, the outcome of the story, because I haven't been with General Foods for 41 years, which became Ultra Group and so forth and Kraft. I have been with IBM. At the end of the day, I was not passionate about this. And I will tell you, I turned down General Foods and took the job with IBM. And I will never forget my mentor in the marketing department at Michigan State was actually very upset with me. And what he said was, he said, Steve, I'm so disappointed. Here's General Foods. They only interview at 12 MBA schools in the country. Let me get this straight. They're offering you 25% more money than IBM, right? It's marketing, and it really shouldn't matter what the product is, whether it's computers or toilet paper or cherry Jello. It's the perfect job for what your background is in, and you're going to join IBM to be one of thousands of salesmen. They don't even require an MBA. And he said, I don't understand it. And I said to him, I appreciate all the points you've made, but I will tell you that intellectually, while I agree with you that it shouldn't matter what the product is, emotionally, it does to me. Because on paper, this was the better job. And it was tough to tell you that I was turning it down. It was tough to tell my parents, my friends. It was embarrassing, actually, because I got a lot of flack. But what I did say was, I'm just not turned on by this. I wasn't passionate about it. And you know what? I was passionate. When I read the articles about IBM, I was passionate about it. When I went on the interviews, I was passionate. And I never had these secondary thoughts as I met people and we talked about their business. And so I said, I'm going to go with my heart. And all I will tell you is that lesson learned has done well for me for 41 years. It's one of the main reasons I'm still with IBM. When IBM to this day talks about enhancing their abilities to get into cloud and technology and artificial intelligence, I'm still jazzed by that. And so my only point as I wrap up this first lesson learned is this. We all do certain things in life, of course, when we have to. But I've worked with a lot of people in my career who will basically say to me, Steve, yeah, look, this is just a job. It's a means to an end, right? My passions lie outside. I'm passionate about, and fill in the blanks, whatever it is. I think that's a tough way to go through life. If you're like most of us and you spend 8, 10, 12 hours a day at your job, I just feel one of the lessons is, yes, there are trade-offs and you can't always do it, but I would encourage everybody to pursue your passion. It's never too late. I think it's a better way to go through life. And I'm glad that I went with my heart. I don't know what my career would have been like with General Foods. It was a wonderful opportunity, but I went with what I was passionate about. And I think that's, if I've learned anything in the last 40 years, that's one of those lessons. Any questions before we move on to the second lesson? So let's talk about, I gave you the lead into
Steve,
this.
just a comment, if
Yes,
you don't mind.
sure.
I loved the page of the full day of interviewing,
Yeah.
which we don't see much of today at all.
You know,
Excellent.
my other comment, which sort of is a lead into the next part, you know, people, it's an interesting comment, Janelle, and I will say this. More than not, most times I've shared this or it's ever come up, people have said to me, you know, Steve, you must have hated it. I mean, it must have been grueling, you know, the 9 interviews. You couldn't wait till it was done. I said, I had the exact opposite feeling. When I was done with the 9, I was like, I wanted 5 more. I was disappointed it was done. And maybe that's just the salesman in me, but you know, the reason it goes into the next topic is I was ultra prepared for these folks. I couldn't wait to sell myself, and I couldn't wait to listen to what they had to say so I could determine whether they were selling me and I was liking what they had to sell. And I think when you walk into interviews and you really are ultra prepared and you can't wait to sell yourself, which is what it is about, then you enjoy this. I enjoyed this experience immensely. But you're right. I've never seen anything like it since.
Yep, amazing.
So let me use that. Thank you, Janelle, for the comment. So differentiating yourself by your questions and points made. That may seem obvious. Let me give you again the quick background to this. So I mentioned to you that John Shingleton was the one that explained this to me. So now let me explain it a little more. He said, Steve, look, there are a lot of people that go into interviews and they prepare very well. And of course, I've seen this as an interviewer in my career, that they know themselves, and we just talked about it. You know yourself, hopefully better than anybody, as the product. So you prepare for an interview and you say, well, you know, I've got a great resume put together. I've worked really hard. I'm ready to talk about myself, the things on my resume. I know if they ask me, well, what did you learn at this job? I'm ready to talk about it. You know, what are your weaknesses? What are your strengths? What would you do differently? And you're prepared full of that. What John Shingleton told me that I'll share with you that I found to be true in the last 4 decades is this. That will often get you the job. If you're well prepared, you know yourself, and you're ready to listen well, like Gary said, and you ask decent questions, that's all fine. I don't mean this to sound harsh. I mean this to be a positive for you. That's not enough. In my experience, that is not enough when you're talking about your dream job. You know, we talk about when you apply to schools and you have reach schools, you have the schools that are in the middle bar, and then you have your safety schools. I'm talking about the reach schools. I'm talking about those reach jobs, the jobs where you say, that's the #1 job on my list. And it's probably a little bit of a stretch. And it was for me, by the way, at General Foods and at IBM. And I'm going to explain why. Because it was a stretch, because I had a good resume. I didn't have a 4.0 average. I wasn't the president of my class. I didn't go to Harvard or Stanford. I went to a good MBA program. The point I will tell you that John Shingleton said to me was, Steve, you can still get the kind of job that you want where you think you don't have the skill set or the resume that's going to automatically get it, but you can still get it if you differentiate yourself by your questions. So I said to him, I'm not quite following. And then he made it clear. He said, research the industry, research the company, come up with some killer questions, questions that will blow the hair back of the interviewer. It's not about quantity, it's quality. So mixed in with your other stuff, some 2 or 3 questions that absolutely will only come from having researched the industry and the company and will be very genuine. And you come up with 2 to 3 questions that you want to really ask and 2 to 3 points you want to make. I absolutely took that to heart. And so let me give you the quick story of how I implemented that at only 23 years old. What you're looking at on the screen, you don't have to read it, but I go into my IBM interviews and I had done a lot of research on IBM and the computer industry. This was one of the key articles that came up. It's from 1976. I was interviewing at this point in 1979, and it was at a Money magazine, and you can see what it is. It was 10 terrific companies to work for, and IBM was actually at the top of the list. And from this article was the part about IBM, a little write-up, and I read this, and from this, something struck me, and it was very, very genuine. And it talked about one of the salesmen at IBM and what they loved about working for IBM. So I go into my interview with IBM, and I will tell you, I was interviewing with a sales manager in Lansing, Michigan. And he said, Steve, you know, we've got a couple of openings. We've got a lot of applicants. He said, your resume makes you competitive, et cetera, et cetera. I knew that. But as I said, I wasn't at the top of my class. My resume didn't jump off in terms of saying, Steve, well, clearly, you know, we should hire you. I had to earn it. I had to differentiate myself. And so I was ultra prepared. I did have 2 or 3 what I thought were killer questions, 2 to 3 blow your hair back questions. And I also had 2 to 3 points I'd want to make. And in this example, it was one of the points I wanted to make. And it was very simple. The point was, what I was prepared for is when he would ask me, Steve, why do you want to work for IBM? And I will tell you that I have asked that question as an interviewer over the years many times, by the way, which I would think almost anybody should be prepared to answer. And I will tell you from professionals like us, that was a difference maker for me in a negative way for many candidates. Because I'd say, well, so we're halfway through it, they're qualified. Why do you want to work for IBM? Oh, Mr. Schumer, you know, IBM's a great company. They've been around a long time and blah, blah, blah. You know what? That was not a differentiating answer. That was a common, no thought put into, I'm interviewing with IBM, I'm interviewing with a lot of companies, and if I get the job, I'll take it. It's just a job. That's not what I was looking for as the interviewer. And that's not what the sales manager was looking for. And by the way, if you're really prepared with 2 to 3 points you want to make, if he hadn't asked me, as we were, you know, 3/4 of the way through the interview, if he hadn't asked me why I wanted to work for IBM, I would have said to him, Mr. So-and-so, excuse me, I'd like to share something with you. What's that, Steve? I'd like to tell you why I want to work for IBM. So, but you know what he did? We're about, I don't know, 2/3 of the way through the interview. I thought it was going well. And you know, I know Gary's a huge baseball fan, so I'll use a baseball analogy. But man, I was standing at the plate just waiting for that pitch. And all of a sudden, it was just this softball that came at me like in slow motion. And he looks at me and he says, Steve, why do you want to work for IBM? And he had no idea that I had researched these articles, that I had underlined, that I had prepared my notes, and I had this ready to answer weeks before the interview, weeks. And he looks at me and he says, so why do you want to work for IBM? And I leaned forward, I looked him in the eye, no notes, I'd memorized this because it came from my heart as well as my head. And I said, I'll tell you exactly why I want to work for IBM. Because I read a Money magazine article about the 10 best companies to work for in the country. IBM was one of those companies. And in the write-up about IBM, I read where they asked one of your salesmen, what do you love most about working for IBM? And his answer was, IBM's intense and constantly revitalized commitment to excellence. And I said to him, when I read that, that struck a chord. That's exactly the kind of company I want to work for. That's the kind of person I think I am. I think I'd be a good match and I'd like the job. I think he almost peed in his pants. He stood up. He said, I want you to wait right here. I said, fine. He comes back about 3 minutes later and he says, Steve, I want you to meet my branch manager, Mr. So-and-so. I said, nice to meet you. And he said, Steve, I want you to tell him what you just told me. And I said, sure. I said, Mr. So-and-so, I want to work for IBM and I'll tell you why. Blah, 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 intense and constantly revitalized. They looked at each other and they said, he looked at the sales manager and says, hire him right now. And you know what? It was very genuine. It wasn't BS. It wasn't to impress them. It was why I wanted to work for IBM. I was jazzed about it, but I wouldn't have known it if I hadn't read this, if I hadn't put in the time and effort, and if I hadn't, through that work, come up with those differentiating questions. And over the years, this is a list I came up with, and not to go through it all, but I've often lectured at colleges and about selling and sales, and they'll say, well, Mr. Schumer, what are your top 10 selling lessons learned? And one of them is this: every single meeting that you're in, and by the way, this is both professional as well as personal, it's a good lesson to learn, which is think about having a couple of key questions and a couple of key points you want to make that differentiate you. So my only point out of this lesson, and you can look at, these are examples I'll put in the deck, but these are very real examples of key questions to ask and key points to make. And so my encouragement, my lesson learned on this is very simple. I said it earlier. You don't have to have the best skill set. I mean, don't misunderstand. You have to be competitive. I could do a great job researching all about NASA and everything else, but if I went to interview for a job to be a rocket scientist at NASA, I don't think I'd get the job. That's not my point, obviously. But my point is that I really believe you can get jobs that you may not think you can get. But if you're simply competitive, you can outwork and outshine other people by truly differentiating yourself by genuine, blow your hair back questions and key points that you want to make. And I believe if it's genuine, it'll come across in your voice, it'll come across in your eyes, and it will be a key differentiator in selling you to that interview. So any questions or comments about that before we go to the third lesson? Okay. So I know Janelle put this in the note that went out, and I think I might have mentioned this up front. This is probably my most fun lesson to share. And it's probably also the most intense. And it may be, candidly, the most important one for you as you look for, again, that landing that next job. So don't take no for an answer. Well, I'm going to assume that all of you have heard that before sometime in your life. Don't take no for an answer. It's kind of a salesy thing, right? We don't take no for an answer. What does that mean in reality? What does that mean operationally, right? So somebody says, we're not giving you the job. That's saying no to you. And how do you say, I'm not taking no for an answer? That probably doesn't seem realistic. If it does, feel free to come off mute and tell me otherwise. But what don't take no for an answer starts with is an attitude, a perspective about yourself. And then I'm going to give you an operational example. And I mentioned those first two examples were from early in my career. This is a very real example from only about 10, 12 years ago, actually, right? 9 years ago, I think. And so, but let me start before we go into, let me give you the attitude that I'm talking about. Don't take no for an answer is about believing that, like what I said about when we were talking about the context for differentiating yourself, it's using that to get the job you really want. Not just any job, but that job that's at the top of your list, or one of the top 2 jobs at the top of your list. And so the point I'm going to make up front before I tell you the story around this is, if you really believe that you would do a great job for some company that, you have some information, maybe you've had the interview, and you look at yourself in the mirror and you say, I would kill, not just to have this job, but I'd kill it. I'd kill it. I could contribute. I know I can. If you can admit that to yourself in all honesty, that's the start of saying, you know what? If they say no to me, I'm not going to accept that. And so at this point, I assume you'd say, well, Steve, that sounds great. How the hell do you put that into reality? And so let me share this example. So I'm going to show you a letter in a moment, but I need to tell you the story first. So my son, Adam, whom you've met, is sitting right next to me here. And this is about him. And he knows that I'll be brutally honest about this, and I'm very proud of Adam. But I say this because Adam was graduating from the College of New Jersey back in 2012. And Adam had a interview that was coming up. This was, I think, the spring, of his senior year. He's going to be graduating in a few months. And Adam says to me, "Hey, Dad, I'm going to be interviewing with ADP, Automatic Data Processing, headquartered in Roseland, New Jersey." Ironically, by the way, ADP was the account that Gary and I were teammates on for 5 years together back in the late 80s. So I said, "Adam, I'm very familiar with ADP. It's a great company. They've got, they have a great reputation amongst their sales force." I said, "Who's your interview with?" And he said, "Well, it's with the regional vice president for the East Coast, whatever it was, the region." And I said to him, and this shouldn't surprise you, I said, "Well, Adam, you know that I've coached you in the past. I've told you about my experience about differentiating yourself by your questions and points made, putting in the time, the research. So I said, if you really want this job, I'd love to sit down with you, before you go for this interview. Let's sit down next weekend. Let's go through, let me see what research you've done. And I'd like to see the 2 or 3 killer questions you've come up with to ask this regional VP and the 2 to 3 key points you're going to make." And I'm assuming many of you are parents. And so maybe you'll appreciate this, that here's Adam at 21. And I make him that offer. I said, "Let's sit down. Let me coach you. I've got a lot of experience." And he said, "You know what, Dad?" Gives me one of these, raises his hand. He goes, "You know what? I got this. I got this." And I remember I had 2 thoughts. One was I was very proud of Adam. I said, "You know what? I really respect his confidence that he's exuding, that he feels he's got this." I also said to myself, he has no clue, no clue. He thinks that he's prepared for this interview. He's not. He's not. And so he goes on the interview, comes back. I said, "How'd it go?" And he's kind of looking down at his shoes and he says, "It went okay." I already knew he's not getting the job. But of course, tell me how it went. And he said, "Well, Dad, I thought I did okay. I thought I did well. I talked about my background. I thought a lot, but he did ask me some questions I felt I wasn't really prepared for. I don't think I differentiated myself. There's still a chance I'll get the job. I don't think I'm going to get the job." So what do you think happens a few days later? He happens to be home on a weekend from school. In his mail, he gets a letter from ADP. I happen to be in his room at the time. He opens it up, and as expected, it's a form letter. "Adam, thanks very much for coming by, but we've decided to go in a different direction. Good luck in your career, but we're not offering you the job." And Adam takes the letter and he crumples it up and he throws it into his garbage can. And I know he's laughing now because he remembers this well. And I walk over to the garbage can and I pull out the letter and I start unruffling it. And he said, "Dad, what are you doing?" And I said, "Adam, I've got a question for you. Do you want this job?" And he said to me right off the bat, understandably, he goes, "Dad, what do you mean, do I want the job? I don't understand what you mean. I mean, I didn't get the job." I said, "I know you didn't get the job, but I'm asking you a different question. Do you want the job?" He said, "Dad, I didn't get the job." I said, "I know." And we go around this about 3 times. And I said, "Adam, look at me. I know you didn't get the job, but I want to ask you something. Do you want this job? Do you believe, after your interview with this regional VP and what you did read about ADP and what you know about the sales job, do you believe that you would enjoy working at ADP?" "Yes, Dad, I do." "Do you believe that you would do well? Do you believe you could do a great job in the sales position that they were offering?" "Yeah, Dad, I do." So in other words, you really wanted this job. You believe that it's a great fit for you, but you didn't get the job. Why? "Well, because I really didn't put in the time and I didn't differentiate myself like you had told me." And I said, "I agree. I think that's exactly what happened." But he said, "Dad, but the point is, I'll apply that next time around to my next opportunity." And I said, "Well, I have a suggestion for you, Adam." He said, "What?" I said, "I would write this guy back. I'd write him a letter. And I would tell him what you just told me. And I'd be brutally honest, by the way. And he said, Dad, I don't know what you're talking about. I said, Adam, I'd write him a letter and I would tell him that you appreciated the opportunity to talk with him. I'd tell him the truth that, you know what, in retrospect, you realize now that you didn't put your best foot forward, because that's true. But what you should also tell him is what you just told me, which I think you're being honest with me, that, you know what, you would be a hell of a salesman for ADP. And you should tell him that, and tell him that you want a second chance. I want you to tell him that you're not going to take no for an answer, because do you really want to be a salesman? Yeah, I do. Well, salesmen don't take no for an answer. They don't. They don't walk out the door the first time the customer says, I don't think I want your product. And as Gary well knows, it takes more. And by the way, you don't always have the best product or the best price or whatever. So you don't just show up, even for IBM, you just don't show up and say, we're from IBM. Do you want this mainframe that's, by the way, 20% more expensive than our competition, yada, yada? You need to sell yourself, and you can't let the first no deter you. So Adam listened to me intently, and he goes, Dad, and we have a great relationship, and I know he respects me. He looked at me and he said, that would never work. And he was only 21 at the time. He's now 31. But I'm going to ask you guys very seriously the same question that I asked Adam. And I said, Adam, look, I know you're only 21, so I have a lot more experience than you, but I want to ask you something, and I just want you to think about it for a moment, and then I want you to answer me. This regional vice president who said no to you, how long do you think, I mean, how experienced was he? I mean, based on what you're guessing his age? Oh, Dad, he looked very experienced. He's probably been doing this 20, 25 years. I said, yeah, I'll bet he has. And I said, how many people do you think he's interviewed in his career? Oh, I don't know, Dad. Hundreds, maybe 1,000. I mean, yeah, I'll bet you it's many hundreds. How many people do you think he has said no to? Oh, Dad, the majority. Right. I think you're right again, Adam. But here's my most important question, Adam. For all the people that regional vice president has ever sent a rejection letter to, what is your best educated guess on whoever came back and said, I'm not accepting no for an answer, I want a second shot? I hope you're thinking about the answer, because Adam thought about it for a moment. He said, Dad, I'm guessing very few to none. I said, you know what, Adam, I have a lot more experience than you. You know how many people I think have ever come back to him? Zero. And if I'm wrong, I'll bet you I'm wrong by single digits. Because, without getting too philosophical, most people, they do take no for an answer. They do. But you know what? You know what the beauty is in that? Two things. One, if you take my advice to not take no for an answer, number one, I really believe you will differentiate yourself just by trying to not take no for an answer. You will differentiate yourself from 99+% of the people out there. That alone. And number two, you may just, in doing so, get a job that you didn't think you had a shot at. So let me just show you. And by the way, we talk about this is, we talk about top 10 qualities for long-term selling success. Yeah. One of them is tenacity. And of course, that's part of this, is you don't take no for an answer. So what's the example? Well, this is the letter. This is the first half of the letter that I mentioned. So I helped Adam write it. I mean, we wrote it together. And you can read it if you want. You'll have a copy of this. But, I mentioned this. The opening paragraph, thanks very much for your time. That's the net of it, right? Disappointed that I was told no. Second paragraph was very honest. Hey, you know what? I really think that I didn't put my best foot forward, et cetera. But, I appreciate, again, the feedback, et cetera. But the key to this not taking no for an answer was the third paragraph. And I'm going to take a moment just to read it. So Adam says to this regional VP, and by the way, it was a letter. And he said, Dad, shouldn't I send an email, whatever? I have his email address. No, sorry, I'm a little bit old school. Send him a letter. You know why? Because it differentiates you. You know how many emails he gets? How many emails do you all get? It'll be one of those in the, in the list, but he'll get a hard copy letter. So gets this letter. Secondly, and related to, but separate from the above request, which was feedback, I want to ask if there's any possibility of giving me another shot. I'm the first to suggest I likely haven't earned that. But in the spirit of straight talk, I also believe I did not put my best foot forward when we met. My interest in your company and opportunity was and remains genuine. I thought I had invested quality time to prepare and make the most of our time together. However, your rejection letter was a wake-up call of sorts that made me realize I could and should have done more to help convince you I had much to bring to ADP. I have great confidence that I can and will build a successful sales career somewhere. If I'm right, it will include not accepting no for an answer. Because if I were one of the salesmen on your team, I'm assuming that's the attitude you'd want to see me demonstrate with your clients. So I'm asking if you would consider giving me another chance. And if you do, I'll prepare as I realize I should have the first time, and promise you'll see a candidate that will make a much more compelling case to offer one of your valued new hire tickets to. I look forward to hearing from you. So we wrote the letter. We sent it off. And Adam says to me one more time, he says, Dad, it's not going to work. And I said, Adam, I don't know if it's going to work. I will admit the odds are high that it won't. But what the hell do you have to lose? And isn't it kind of fun? Like, what if it works? So he sends it off. He goes back to school. He calls me from school a few days later and he said, Dad, I haven't heard from ADP. I told you it wouldn't work. I said, Adam, be patient. You know what? Maybe it didn't work, but it's a hard copy letter. Maybe it's sitting on his desk. He's traveling. I don't know. Just give it. I think it was another few days. All I know is I'll never forget. I get a call from Adam from school and he goes, Dad, I can't believe it. I said, what's that? He said, I just got a call from the assistant to that, vice president for regional sales. And she said to me that Mr. So-and-so got my note and he would like me to come back for another interview. And he said, Dad, you were right. And of course, being a parent, I said, I'm sorry, because I don't get that often enough. So I said, I'm sorry, could you repeat that? What did you say? And he said, Dad, you were right. And I kidded him. And I said, Adam, look, I'm really pleased. I said, I didn't know if this would work, but Adam, the point is it did, right? The art of the possible. And it was a shot. But most importantly, what did you learn? What did you learn from this? And he said, Dad, what I learned is, that this is possible. It didn't take much. I said, exactly, right? Because you separated yourself. I'm convinced that this guy never got a letter like this in his life. And it's not necessarily, you'd have your own words, your own personality. It was the act that he opened up a letter going, who's this from? It's from somebody I rejected. And you know what I said to Adam? I said, and Adam, let me make this clear. This guy is giving you a second chance. Now, I'm not going to take no for an answer from you. You will not waste this person's time. These are not bullshit words. You are going to be ultra prepared and you're going to back up what you said in this letter. So I'm going to grill you the entire weekend. And when I say you're ready to go meet with him, that's when you're going to go meet with him. And Adam said, I agree. And he got that second shot. Now he ended up with IBM. That's not really the point. But he did get this second shot. And so my only point, I hope if that's not inspiring to you, I really believe that if there's a job that you really want and you don't get it the first time around, are you going to do this for every single opportunity and send hundreds of letters? That's not what this is about, quality over quantity. But I'm going to tell you that there are other examples I could give you where not taking no for an answer really did work. But I hope that very honest and simple example is enough to convince you that if there's a job you really believe fits you well, at least go back a second time. And then if they say, we meant it the first time and it's no, no, and no, there's a time to say, okay, I got it. But don't take no for an answer first time out. Any questions or comments before we wrap up with the last lesson?
Yes, and I want to say, Russell, yes, I want to say thank you very much. This is very inspiring, and thinking about how I can say, because actually I was turned down on something last week that was a teaching position at a school that I was not exactly sure about, given the traffic and that they wanted everybody to come back in person. I really want a remote platform, remote position.
Yeah.
So,
Well, Russ, I appreciate you sharing that, and thanks for the
You're welcome.
comment back. I don't know if there's time to go back, but like I said, if it's not time to go back on this deal, there'll be an opportunity in the future. And I hope you're inspired enough, and I hope you'll take a copy.
Yeah.
Feel free to plagiarize, but this letter worked for Adam. Maybe something like it would work for one of you. You never know unless you try, right?
That's right.
So-
I wish my dad had been that inspiring. I'll just say that.
We all try, right? We try to be the best parents we can be. And I know we're supposed to wrap up about 10 minutes. I may go 5 minutes over, but I won't make it much later than that. But let me wrap up with the last lesson. So personalize your networking. That may seem like the most obvious thing. And of course, in this networking group, we talk about that a lot, but I'll tell you my personal story around that. That again, hopefully from an operational, what I like to say an operational standpoint may help you. And so this has to do with, you'll see a note up here from March 1st, 2010 that was sent to me. So even though I did it quickly, I showed you my background early on. So I've been with IBM 41 years. Well, back in 2010, I had been with IBM almost 30 years to that point. 30 years in August would have been 30 years. So I was 29 years plus into my career. And let me just position this for you. Again, 2010 is not that long ago, at least not for me. So 11 years ago, I am 30 years into my career. I had been an executive at that point for 12 years with IBM. I was very highly appraised. I was on my way to being a vice president. I had interviewed for jobs, been supported. Things were great for me at IBM, right? And on March 1st, 2010, at about 10 in the morning, I get a ping from my boss, Laura, and she said, "Steve, I'd like to speak to you. Do you have a few minutes?" I said, "Sure." So I call her back. We get on the phone, and she said, "Steve, I just want to inform you that you're being laid off." And I said, "What?" She said, "Well, you're part of an IBM resource action." That's what IBM calls it, a resource action. "You're being laid off." And I was in shock. And of course, I had myself as an executive and a longtime manager, I had to resource people. But, 9 times out of 10, it was, well, we couldn't afford all the people we had. So we'd rank them, top to bottom. And whoever was at the bottom, not that they weren't good performers. And it's always been a very difficult thing to do, good, hardworking, loyal people, but forced to rank them and let people. And I knew that because I was amongst the highest ranked executives within my area of sales operations within IBM and one of the most experienced, I knew it wasn't that. But what she informed me was the special project that I had been handpicked for 2 years earlier was killed by some very high level exec in the company almost overnight. And as a result, I was being laid off. And I said, well, first of all, I was in shock that they were canceling the project. Maybe a number of you can relate to that. But I said, well, so in other words, based on my experience though, and contribution and ranking, I mean, you'll help me like find another job. And basically it was, no, that's not the way it works. It's, you have 30 days, good luck. And more specifically, and being brutally honest, I knew at that moment, literally about 98% of the people at that time, when you got on the resource list, you were out. You were out. And it was, so 10 in the morning, she tells me this. And I was sitting at my desk, and to be, again, in the spirit of true candor, I just sat there at my desk, and I think for the next 10, 15, 20 minutes, I just cried. I cried. I remember my tears were hitting the desk. And it still gets to me when I think about it, because it was the worst moment in my 41 years to be told that I was laid off after, as I'm sure many of you can relate, after 30 years of giving everything, and with a little sense of humor. It's like, don't you understand? I mean, don't you know that I told the managers when I joined IBM 30 years ago, because of IBM intense and constantly vitalized commitment to excellence, I chose IBM. I turned down General Foods. Are you kidding me? So I cried. But then remember, this lesson is about, I'll remind you, personalizing your network. So what the hell does this have to do with that? Well, I'm about to get to that, because I gathered myself. And by the way, this letter showed up, about an hour after I talked to Laura, about 11 in the morning, right? Follow up. And by the way, a couple things on this that I highlight. I always love this about this. Steve, you've been identified for permanent layoff as part of the sales leadership. I remember thinking, your IBM employment will end permanently. In 2 sentences, permanent, meaning, Steve, we're going to make this clear to you. This is permanent. You're gone, right? Like, no ifs, ands, or buts. It's permanent. And then I remember reading the last paragraph. I understand the challenges that this decision brings and the potential for anxiety and disruption in your personal life, but appreciate your professionalism in the weeks ahead. Please make use of the resources available to you. Very, very nicely written. You know how I read that? I understand you must be upset out of your mind. Yeah, I am. But I appreciate it if you'd be professional and not like take it out on us. Just shut up and leave, please, quietly, and go make use of the outplacement services and so forth. So I got this letter and I read it. And then I started gathering myself, because I showed you that slide that talked about top 10 selling lessons learned. So you got to walk the talk. And I said, you know what? This is the wrong decision. I belong at IBM. And I understand why they've done this, but they've made a mistake. And I'm not going to take no for an answer. I have resilience. I have tenacity. And I am going to claw and scratch my way for the next 30 days to try to find a job, which is what I did. And so if you look at the date, March 1st, 2010, the first email that I sent was at 12:52 p.m. And what happened between 11 a.m. when I got that note from Laura Smith and 1 p.m.? You know what I did? I actually organized myself and said, I know a lot of people being here 30 years, and I am going to send emails to all of these people saying I'm looking for a job. But here's the key. And maybe this lesson learned, you'll say, Steve, we're all doing this, right? This is not new news, but I'm going to tell you, I've seen a lot of people laid off, some that I've laid off, and many, many other people. And I've gotten many notes, but you know what? Many of those notes, I was on a distribution list. See, people were desperate, people were in a rush. And so they sent out a note, very honest, right? And desperate, looking for a job, but they sent it to a number of people. That's not good. That's not how you sell. This note that I sent to Phil Guido, certainly I sent similar notes to a lot of other people. But you know what? I took the time to do 2 things. Number one, I never sent a note to anybody that wasn't directly just to them. That's how you personalize your networking. And the note, while 80% of the sentences were the same, 20% was personal. 20% was personalized to Phil, not just by his name, but something about Phil, something about how we had last met or when we had last talked or something. So Phil knew that when he read it, he felt it was me talking to him, one-on-one selling. That was important. That was important. And I'm going to come out of the presentation for a moment and wrap up, like I said, in the next 5 minutes. But I want to show you something. And Janelle, Gary, can you see my screen still? Can you see my email?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
So here's what I want to show you. This is a folder that I have. It's called IBM Career. And in this folder, I've highlighted 2 things. At the bottom, this is, of course, chronological. So this is the oldest note in the folder. It's the note that I just showed you that I got from Laura Smith on March 1st, 2010 at 11 in the morning. And then I showed you the email I sent to Phil Guido at 12:52 p.m. on March 1st. And then I sent all these other notes the same day, every single one personalized. And here's what I'll show you. Look, and if you look at the timestamp, they're all March 1, and here's when it was sent, right? And I'll just scroll through this for a couple of minutes. Let me speed up a little bit.
Steve, just so you know, there's 4,169 emails you sent.
Yep, I know.
Okay, cool.
Here's what I highlighted this note because at 1:10 in the morning, I sent my last note. The one at 1:56 I received. But the point is, from 1 in the afternoon to 1 in the morning, and I once counted this for this purpose, but I sent around 400 individual emails. I don't remember eating that day, by the way. I think I went to the bathroom twice, but I'm not sure. Candidly, I was fueled by, and to be candid, I was fueled by anger, right? But the point is, I sent around 400 individual emails in one day. And by the way, what's in this folder? I sent many follow-up emails and back and forth to people the next day on March 2nd, and then on March 3rd, and March 4th, and March 5th. And along the way, I did find opportunities, and I had a number of interviews. And I will tell you this, and I'll come back to the deck just so you get the idea there. But I will tell you that it was a humbling experience. I had vice presidents that knew me that said, Steve, you've been with IBM 30 years, you're highly skilled, highly thought of. I'd love to hire you in my group, but the only thing I have is a lower level job. Would you be willing to talk to one of my managers about it? I said, sure. And I talked to that manager, and I'll never forget, the manager says to me, now, Steve, what we have is we have this sales job. It's for sellers, and you'd be selling IBM storage over the phone. And remember my example of the left half of the brain, right half of the brain. And I remember saying to him, well, Bob, I'll tell you what, that sounds like a great opportunity. And I would be the best damn storage salesman over the phone you've ever seen. And you know what I wanted to say to him? Again, are you kidding me? That is like 3 levels below what I'm doing now. And I would rather take a fork, shove it in my eye, and it went to the back of my brain, out the back of my head. But I didn't say that because I said, I am going to find a job and I'm going to live to fight another day, but I am not leaving this company. And I didn't, of course. And what really happened was, because I sent those individuals, what happened was with about 3 days to spare, I got an offer. 27 days passed. And I got an offer to stay in IBM. And it was at a level below where I had been for 12 years. But I took the job. And I could have left. I could have gone to another company. That's not what I wanted to do at that point, not after investing 30 years. That was my decision. And by the way, if I had not gotten the job, I would have made my way to another company, a different opportunity. But my first and primary goal was to stay with IBM. And so when that happened, and I was proud of the effort, but I wouldn't wish this on anybody. It was the worst month of my life. And I had people afterwards say, Steve, we heard that you survived the resource action. Like nobody survives those things. How did you do it? And I ended up putting down these 10 elements of advice to other IBMers to say, well, if you get laid off, here's what I suggest. But the essence of what I'm sharing with you was, which may sound obvious, but no mass emails ever. I know Janelle's big on handwritten notes, like she just talked about, and Mark Murphy wrote that handwritten note. That's even better. But the point is to individualize your networking. So it's very much like what I've talked about a couple of times. If you're going to do a mass mailing kind of effort to find jobs and so forth, I wish you well. But if you prioritize and you say there's that one job or one or two jobs at the very top, put in the work, put in the time, find something you're passionate about, ideally. Don't give up on that too easily. Put in the effort, research the companies, research the industry, and then come up with those killer questions that blow your hair back. You are capable of it, but it comes from research. Couple of key questions, couple of key points made, quality over quantity. Have an attitude. Don't take no for an answer. If they say no, write them that kind of letter back. What the hell do you have to lose? And when you network, whether it's in my example where you're looking for that job, personalize it. Don't send a mass email and make it a one-on-one sale. And I hope, like I said at the front end, I hope A, I haven't wasted your hour. And number two, I hope at least one, if not all four of these lessons resonated somewhat, because I believe that all of you are capable of implementing all four of these things. We all are. And with that, again, I say thank you. And if there's any other questions, comments, I'd welcome them now.
I have a comment.
Yes.
So my mom, she was with IBM for 37 years and she got cut resource actions after 37 years. And she did exactly what you just said. She was emailing the different managers, emailing her colleagues, emailing a lot of people who she knew. And, you know, she would always end the call, can you refer me to someone else? So one person would lead to another person and the whole chain would keep going. And she got two offers, two managers wanted to hire her. But as you said earlier, once you're on the RA list, it's very hard to get off of it.
Yes.
So she had two managers that wanted to hire her, but HR blocked it.
Yep.
And they said, oh, we don't have, it was a funding issue, nothing to do against you. It was funding issue. So she did all the right things. She did all the networking. She found two managers that wanted to hire her, but HR blocked it. So it's like, what can you do in that case?
And you know, Mike, my comment back, and you know, I appreciate you sharing that. And I'm sorry, of course, that happened to your mom. I'm sorry it happened, as Gary knows, back in 1993 when IBM almost went out of business, and Gary and I were wherever we were in our careers. I was 13 years in my career. Gary, I think, was there already like 17 years. But you know, I'll just share with you, I watched in 1993, 94, 95, as we went from a company of 407,000 employees to about 225. In other words, basically in 3 years, we laid off every other person in the company. And it was disgusting. It was grueling. It happens. But I say this in now a positive way. I'm a sales guy by background, which I'm sure by now has come across. You know what? You don't get every sale. You can have the best product, the best price, the best relationship. There's still times it just doesn't happen when it should. That's life, right? But it is about batting average. So all you can do is do what's within your control. Try, put in the time, put in the effort, personalize your networking, don't take no for an answer. And if it doesn't happen, you know what? If you continue to do those things, your batting average is going to be much better than it would be otherwise. That's the whole point. It's about, Janelle has more experience, would say this better. But I really believe if you take these things apart and you internalize them and you believe them and you believe in yourself, you will improve your batting average. There's no guarantees. But it will.
So I guess as a follow-up, like, is there anything that you would have suggested? I mean, this is hindsight and she moved on. She's with another company now, but is there anything that you would have suggested that she could have done after finding out that HR blocked it?
You know, Mike, at the end of the day, if HR blocked it, you know, the answer may be there's no way around that, right? Because in a sense, you need an exception process. And the only way that happens, short answer is for HR to unblock it, the person that was looking to hire your mother, they'd have to go to their leadership team, right? And the high enough level executive would have to go to HR and say, I understand you're blocking it. I want this exception. You see, that leader would have to be so sold on your mother joining their team that they would have to not take no for an answer from HR and say, I'm taking the shot. They only have so many chits, right? But on this one, I want the exception. And that has happened And I've seen it happen. So it's not so much that your mother could have done something different, right? It's about the person that your mother's selling to. Maybe she did all she could, but that's what it would have taken. For HR to change your mind, nothing your mother could have done to change it. It would have taken a sponsor to change HR's mind internally. So it's possible, is the answer.
Somebody with a pair of balls.
Thank you.
Hey, Steve,
Any other questions, comments?
Yes,
Russ?
yes. Well, I was just curious that because I actually had a temporary position with IBM in Stanford, and my neighbors was with IBM a long time. What was actually going on then? Not that it's maybe it's a little off topic, but was in some kind of reorganization bankruptcy thing when you said it almost went out of business?
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I mentioned back in 1993,
Right.
this up. Yeah, I will just say this, as Gary knows, we lived through it. IBM back in the early 90s almost went out of business. And in 93, 94, 95, in those 3 years, IBM lost more money in those 3 years than any company had ever lost worldwide in business history.
Wow.
It was almost a given that IBM was going to be broken up and be sold off in little pieces. And IBM hired Lou Gerstner, and the decision was made to try to keep the company together and bring it back. And Lou Gerstner, in one of the great turnaround stories in business history, did exactly that over the next 10 years. But IBM was on the brink of bankruptcy.
Wow. And reorganization. Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah,
different story for another time. But the reason I brought that up is because one of the ways we had to come back, we had to cut cost. We cut half the damn company. We laid 200,000 people off. That's what we did, right? And then we had to grow, but we had to get the cost under control. It was a terrible thing to go through.
Wow. Yeah. Paul Rice and I don't know if you know him, Paul Rice and Rob.
Oh, I know Paul well.
In the WHO, they're former IBMers as well. Yeah.
There was another. I'm sorry, if there's a question, just come off mute.
I
Steve,
have a quick question. Yeah,
Steve, oh, go ahead.
Yes.
go ahead, John.
Steve, I just wondered what happened to Laura.
Oh, Laura's still with the company.
Is that right?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. But by the way, we don't. I mean, with all due respect, she made a business decision. But I'm only using some of my sense of humor when I say we don't exchange holiday cards. Let me put it that way, okay? I'm still angry. Angry, right? I'll always have that anger, but it was a business decision. I didn't like it. I didn't agree with it, and I pushed through it. But Laura's still around, and we're not on each other's Christmas card list.
Steve, just
I'm sorry. Was there a question? I can't see. There's a question.
Yeah, I had a quick question, Steve. It's Kurt Gary.
I'm sorry, Gary. Was there a question in the chat? Kurt, I'm sorry, Adam.
Factors that caused the loss in 93.
What's that?
The factors that caused the loss.
Oh, Adam's telling me, I'm sorry. There's a question in chat. Kurt, I'm sorry. There's a question in chat about the factors that caused that loss in 93. That's a little bit off topic. So my 20-second answer, and I'd like, Kurt, thanks for your patience. The short answer, which doesn't do it justice at all, is look, IBM, which was a pinnacle of success in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. IBM, in my opinion, in the 20-second answers, IBM became arrogant and full of itself and lost its way. And in marketing 101 terms, IBM lost touch with its customers and didn't understand what the market wanted and was pushing product instead of fulfilling needs. And it got its ass handed to it as a result. So the comeback story is great, but I appreciate the question about how did IBM go from being at the top to the bottom is what's happened to a lot of companies, but those companies went out of business. Very rare to get this close to being out of business and come pretty far, if not all the way back. So
you couldn't have described that better.
Thank you, Gary. Keep me honest.
Unbelievably arrogant, unbelievably stuck on maximizing profit on existing products, not reaching out to the customers.
And who, I'm sorry, who was the gentleman at the beginning that said corporate America doesn't listen?
That was Dave Gallagher.
Yeah, Dave, if Dave is still on, yeah, Gary and I saw that internally. A whole lot of people that weren't listening a whole lot because they didn't think they needed to.
Right.
Kurt, I'm sorry, you had a question.
Hey, Steve, I just want to thank you. I really appreciate the 4 lessons. I think really to stay on the topic that you were on the 4th bullet was that last quote I just caught with the Winston Churchill quote at the bottom was,
Yes.
if you've done as much as you can possibly do to
Right.
stay within your own sphere of influence and, create your own destiny as best as you can, what more can you do? And, coming from another company that was a little off track for some time, General Motors, and having a wonderful 30-year stint with General Motors, I
Yep.
can definitely see that, the lessons you've provided can be applicable to trying to stay with a company or to find a new role. So thank you very much. Appreciate
I
it.
appreciate your pointing that out, and I put up that last lesson, but look, I hope this has come across as genuine versus preachy. And I've said this many times because I believe it. So I hope, again, it comes across to you as genuine, that we're all capable of this. When you really care, when you're passionate about it, about yourself and your situation, never, never, never give up. You're capable of it. We all have that energy. We all have that drive when it really, really matters. And I really believe that it mattered here. So don't give up. And then I said, and this was in line with what we just talked about, like with your mom, if it doesn't happen, you'll know forevermore you did all you could, and know that there's life after IBM, believe you'll be fine, and admit it's not life and death. All of that's true. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't go 100 miles an hour and go for it. And if it doesn't happen, you can live with it. You can live with it, right?
Thank you.
Fair point. Thank you, Kurt. Any other questions, comments? Again, I know we're over time. I'll turn, by the way, again, thank you for the time that you all invested with me, and Gary and Janelle. Thank you for the opportunity. I hope I gave back a little bit. So I'll turn it back to you guys.
Steve, thank you.
Steve,
Nobody
you
I
are
know-
superb.
Nobody I know tells the don't take no for an answer story and the value of networking better than you do. We talk about networking all the time and how you can build a network and talk to people and learn from them and benefit from them. But you have a real life example that couldn't be more true to the target. And that story and the don't take no for an answer story in all the right context. We can tell people all you want that you've got nothing to lose, but people invest their soul in doing this stuff and they feel bad when it doesn't work and they don't want to be rejected again. Once you've been rejected once, what else are they going to do to you? Reject you again?
Right.
You don't get extra negative points for being rejected twice. You still don't have the job.
Right.
So
Gary, and
you tell this story in that way and deliver that message better than anybody I know. So thank
it's
you.
true.
Thanks.
And Gary, one of the other things that happens is obviously in what I do, I probably get more rejections than in a day that most people get in a month. And I go back and express, and I'm sure, and of course, you have the ear for me on occasion about why I get so frustrated. I know how the candidates get frustrated when HR or talent acquisition doesn't read what I read, and they just toss the resume and say, well, that's not what the one I'm looking for. Well, did you read the So I will go back and fight for that and say, this is why you need to see this person.
Yep.
We walk a fine line, recruiters walk a fine line to this, but Stephen says it so perfectly, how not to take no for an answer. And I will fight tooth and nail, for candidates when I think they're the best fit. And 99 and 9/10% of the time, they end up getting that job.
Well, I think Steve hit on an interesting point when answering Mike's question about his mom's experience with IBM, because HR or anybody really who puts up a roadblock only puts up a roadblock because some executive above them allows them to.
Well, because I have no balls to say
Well,
let them in.
I will not debate the quality of their anatomical parts. I will just suggest that for whatever reason, whether they got balls or whether they got lack of interest or whether they're overlooking it or whether they allow themselves to be too busy, People do that stuff because they are empowered to do it. And there is always an executive, if he or she is motivated enough that they can go back to those people with the roadblocks and say, unblock it. You just got to find that right person, and you've got to get them motivated enough to do what you want them to do. And that's hard.
Yeah.
Sometimes, the systems are set up to protect executives from people going to them saying, I want you to go for an exception. It's the good
That's right.
executives who allow those conversations to take place when they are merited.
That's
And
right. and
unfortunately,
unblock it
for a
right
long
now.
time, IBM didn't have a lot of them.
Right.
And, I've been out for 10 plus years, so I don't know what they got now. I'll leave that to Steve to work out. As long as I'm getting my pension and the stock price doesn't tank, I'm okay. So, but yeah, IBM went through some tough times and they earned it. They earned it.
Steve, thank you so much.
My
Yeah.
pleasure.
Steve, my friend, you were great again. Can't appreciate you enough. Thank you so much.
You all. Thank you all.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. We will be back in October, second Wednesday of the month. As of right now, we are still continuing to do these via Zoom. We are looking at the world as it evolves, and we promise you, the very first time we can come back to face-to-face meetings in person in a safe way, we will be doing that. So believe
Without a
me,
doubt.
as much as I know you want us to, we want to do it more, but we don't want to.
I'm enjoying it the way it is, just so you know. I like it. I like it this way.
Well,
Maybe I'm unusual.
I would tell you, Russ, and I'll just voice my own opinion. Networking is better face to face.
Yes. I
It
agree.
is much tougher to present online than it is
Mhm.
in front of a live group. You get much more and better interaction when you're in person. The quality of what we do goes up when we're in person. And this is an accommodation to do the best we can in a tough situation. So we're going to do this as long as we need to, but not one day more. When we don't need to anymore, we're coming back live.
Right.
So anyway, if you need anything from us, in the
Thank you
course
all
of the
for
month, you know
coming.
where to find us. I'm sorry.
No, thank you all for coming. All our new people, wonderful. Thank you for attending.
And these slides will be emailed out to everybody? Is that?
Yeah, well, I will email them when I send the summary note. I'll get that out. We will also send a link to the recording if anybody wants to watch it again or send it to someone else who wasn't able to attend. That'll go out with the summary note too, and that'll be either tomorrow or Friday,
Okay, great.
as soon as I can get to it. So thank you all for everybody. Thank you all for coming. Good night.
Thank
Stay
you.
well, stay safe.
Night.
Be careful in
you,
the
thank
storms.
you.
Yeah.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Oh, good night.
All right.
Bill, thanks for coming.